Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another question the narrative video, and today's topic is, could this be true about the sons of God? I am still reading through Gary Wayne's Genesis 6 conspiracy because as much as I talk about it, I still have not finished the entire book yet because it's huge. But I was actually rereading the Fairy Kingdom book the other day. Not the book, the chapter, just because it interests me so much. And something caught my eye that sent me on a rabbit trail about the sons of God. Now, if you're not in the homeschooling community, you might be wondering what a rabbit trail is, because in the truther community, you're used to hearing about rabbit holes. Well, this is what a rabbit trail is. If you go down the rabbit hole of the sons of God, there are often little clues that you learn that can send you in tons of different directions just from that one clue. And those tons of different directions are the rabbit trails. So that's what I'm following today, are some rabbit trails in the rabbit hole that is the sons of God. So does that make sense? So anyway, this is what got me thinking. In the Fairy Kingdoms chapter, Gary Wayne writes that the Norse believed that the royal families all descended back to the god Thor through his various offspring of demigods, which are also known as Nephilim. If you saw the video that I did with Donita Fogelman, I believe it was last week or 2 weeks ago, we had actually talked about the god Thor and how we believe that it's possible that he may have been one of the lowercase g gods that was placed above the nation of Scandinavia in the allotment of nations after the Tower of Babel. So if you're not familiar with the allotment after the Tower of Babel, I'll just read to you from Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9. And again, this is talking about after the nations were divided after the fall of the Tower of Babel. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. So, what it tells us here is that the other nations, besides the Lord's portion, which is Jacob's allotted heritage, they were all given to the other lowercase g gods of the divine council. So, what that means are, when we speak of the god Thor, could he possibly have been one of those? Maybe. I also think of other gods such as Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs. Also, Dagon of the Philistines, Asher of Assyria. The list goes on and on. And are these any of the members of the divine council that actually ended up rebelling? Is it them? I don't know specifically, but I started wondering if it is these, we'll just say princes over each of these nations, that these nations did start worshiping. And in fact, I am wondering if they then crossed the line even further and if they themselves may have started to mate with the human women, as did the Watchers before the flood. So I'm just thinking, could this have been a second incursion? I won't say the second incursion, meaning exactly how there were giants after the flood, because there were giants before the nations were divided after Babel. But I am thinking that it is very possible that the lowercase g gods, the Elohim, who were placed over these nations, may have started mating with these women. Now, before I even get into that any further, I know that some people are going to say, but my Bible doesn't say the sons of God. So, and you're right, most Bibles do not say the sons of God. Most Bibles say the sons of Israel. And we will just look at each one. Heavenly court, that's what this one says. Sons of God, children of Israel, children of Israel. And yeah, I'm going to point out King James says children of Israel. So that might lead some of you to say, well, that's it then. It's definitely children of Israel, because I am always having people in the comments tell me that I should only be reading from the King James. Well, that's an issue when it comes to this, and I'm going to show why. This is, and I just shared an article from Logos, I think it was last week. I'm going to share this one too, and it's also by Dr. Michael Heiser, and I will be referring to his book, Unseen Realm, today too, because he speaks of this whole incident of Deuteronomy 32:8 in his book, Unseen Realm. But I wanted to go over the whole sons of Israel or sons of God thing, because I know I will get people in the comments saying, but it wasn't sons of God. It was the sons of Israel that he broke up the nations, or divided the nations and handed them over to. After the great flood, everyone had one language. Humanity congregated in the region of Babylonia, the land of Shinar, and started building a tower that would reach into the heavens. God stopped the project by transforming the single language into many, dispersing humanity over the earth, and creating the nations and regions listed in Genesis 10. Most people think it ends there, but there's more. The story picks up again in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, and the story changes depending on what Bible version you use. When the Most High apportioned the nations as an inheritance, when he divided up humankind, he established the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Some Bibles may read sons of Israel instead of sons of God. And in fact, I'm going to say that most of them say sons of Israel. The difference is due to an ancient manuscript disagreement with major theological ramifications. So there's a chart here, and it will just show you the difference between those Bibles that are translated from the Masoretic texts and those that are translated from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they have the differences in bold for each of these. So in Deuteronomy 32:8, those that were translated from the Masoretic text say the sons of Israel, while those that were translated from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have been found, I believe, to be older than the Masoretic texts, it says the sons of God. And down here, it just shows that there are other differences here. It says his people. This says, oh, heavenly ones. This one says his servants. This one says his sons. And in some cases, there are things completely missing from the Masoretic text translations. So I just want to take note. The King James says sons of Israel. So keep that in mind for what I'm going to read next. Is sons of Israel accurate? Most English Bibles have sons of Israel or something similar because the translation is based on the traditional Hebrew text of the Old Testament, known to us as the Masoretic text. But how does God dividing humankind and fixing the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel make any sense? Deuteronomy 32:8 harkens back to what happened at Babel, and Israel did not exist at that time. So there you go. How could it be according to the number of sons of Israel when there was no sons of Israel at that point? If you read through the table of nations in Genesis 10, Israel does not even appear. Sons of God is the reading in two other older manuscripts, the Septuagint, an ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, a set of manuscripts discovered in the desert not too far from Jerusalem. Bible translators agree that Sons of God is the more original reading, but they usually place it in a footnote at Deuteronomy 32:8, not in the actual text. The English Standard Version, though, and others place Sons of God into their translation. So why is there a difference? Deuteronomy 32:8 is a textbook example of how later scribes sometimes changed the biblical text in a misguided attempt to protect God's reputation. So again, I have to point this out. Sons of Israel was placed there by scribes. Okay? Sons of Israel is in the King James Version. So, it was down here. All right. Other parts of Deuteronomy were also changed by scribes. When you line up the Dead Sea Scroll reading with the Masoretic text, the traditional Hebrew text most English translations are based upon, you can see that the original was altered. Notice that Deuteronomy 32:43 in the Dead Sea Scrolls has 3 poetic pairings. Since it's a poetic section, symmetry is not only important, it's expected. The Masoretic text reading has removed or altered parts of 2 of the pairings. The first, as in Deuteronomy 32:8, eliminates references to other divine beings, sons of God in 32:8, heavenly ones and gods in 32:43. So it's referring to this part of the chart right now. At some point, a scribe thought this reference to other gods was theologically offensive. The first line of the final pairing was removed because someone hating God was also offensive. God, of course, doesn't need to be protected by a zealous scribe or anyone else. Israel's doctrine was that Yahweh was unique and above all other divine beings. In a severe judgment, the nations at Babel were disinherited by Yahweh and given over to the administration of other gods, whose actions would be judged by the God of Israel. This paved the way for God to create a new people, Israel, in the very next chapter of Genesis. And ironically, it was through Abraham's seed that the disinherited nations would be reclaimed. So I want to point out to you that I don't keep highlighting that the King James Version has the sons of Israel to say that it is not trustworthy, because I believe the King James Version is trustworthy. However, it is not completely 100% without alterations, and this is one example of it. So I just had to point that out because there are some people who believe that that is absolutely pristine, and it is not. And so we need to be careful even with the King James Version. So the question then becomes, if these gods who were placed over the other nations at this allotment started mating with human women, that would mean that they then did that in rebellion against God. And is there any indication that that is what happened? And yes, there actually is. I'm going to read to you a paragraph, just a portion of a paragraph from Dr. Michael Heiser, the one who wrote the article that I just read, from his book Unseen Realm, which is a phenomenal book, and I'll leave a link in the description box to this and also to Gary Wayne's book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and I will leave a link in the box to the article because I don't think that I said that I would do that. I usually do anyway. But here's what he says in Unseen Realm. God decreed in the wake of Babel that the other nations he had forsaken would have other gods besides himself to worship. It is as though God was saying, if you don't want to obey me, I'm not interested in being your God. I'll match you up with some other God. Psalm 82, where we started our divine council discussion, and he's talking about earlier in the book, echoes this decision. That psalm has Yahweh judging other Elohim, sons of the Most High, for their corruption in administering the nations. The psalm ends with the psalmist pleading, rise up, O God, judge the earth, because you shall inherit all the nations. Then right in the beginning of the next chapter, I'm just going to read to you one more paragraph from his book. It says, the Old Testament therefore describes a world where cosmic geographical lines have been drawn. So what he means is all the borders of those nations have been solidified by Yahweh, by the Lord, when he put these other lowercase g, these other Elohim over these other nations that had turned against him. Israel was holy ground because it was Yahweh's inheritance in the language of Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9. The territory of other nations belonged to other Elohim because Yahweh had decreed it. Psalm 82 told us that these lesser Elohim were corrupt. We aren't told how the Elohim Yahweh assigned to the nations became corrupt, only that they were. It is clear from Deuteronomy 4:19-20, 17:3, 29:25, and 32:17 that these Elohim were illegitimate for Israelite worship. So we don't know how these Elohim became corrupt, but they did. And I'm going to ask I'm going to assume that it may have had something to do with them allowing the people to worship them. That certainly could be an issue. In Scandinavia, we had Thor being worshipped. And I'm going to point out again that each of these nations that I'm going to talk about right now claim that their royal lineage descended from the gods or from a god. So just as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, in Norse tradition, they believe that their royal bloodlines descend from the god Thor and from his minglings with women creating demigods or Nephilim, and then them just passing it on through the various Nephilim. The same thing is true with Amun, who in ancient Egypt, who we know was worshipped, and the pharaohs claim to have been descendants from him. I believe it was Amun first, and then down the line, I think that then they claim to have been descended from the god Aten, but they claim to be descended from a god. We have the Aztec worship of Quetzalcoatl too. This is Asher of the Philistines, and we certainly know that he was being worshipped. And Dagon of, Asher, did I say Philistines? He's Assyria. That is Assyria. I should have written this down. I'm doing this out of my head. Asher is Assyria. Dagon, the fish god, is the Philistines. So if these Elohim allowed these people to worship them instead of the Most High, and I'm also thinking, what if they also did the same thing that the Watchers did and started to procreate? And there is some indication that they did that, especially in the cases of Thor and of Amun and even Aten, because the people claim that their royal lineages come from these gods. And also it's just commonplace all over the world that nations all over claim that their royal families are descendants of the gods. So that's my question. Were the gods that originally did this, not originally because that would be pre-flood, but were they also part of this, these gods that were given the allotments? And I also want to point out that the heavenly beings, they're described so many different ways in the Bible. And yes, for example, the cherubim were described as having 4 faces: the face of a lion, the face of an oxen, sometimes it says cherub, the face of a man, and the face of an eagle. And so I also find it very interesting that we do find a lot of these hybrid beings, that some of them do have lion heads. We have the minotaur. We have the depictions of these half bird, half humans in at least Egypt. There could be other places too, but I'm wondering if that could possibly have something to do with it too. I don't know, but just another passing thought that I had. So beyond that, then I was having a discussion about this whole thing with Donita from Prairie Dust channel that I had on here last week. And she brought up a very good question, which then sparked me to start thinking about the genetic aspect of the reproduction of these heavenly beings with human women. And what she was basically saying was that it is her belief that the first generation of Titans or Nephilim were all male. And by every indication, it does seem that that's the case. You will usually hear of them as being male. I don't hear of any of these Titan Nephilim as being female. But then she said that in subsequent generations, they do seem like they start to have females intermixed in the Nephilim. So in subsequent generations after that first one, there does seem to be indication that there are female Nephilim. And so, I think of some of these goddesses that come to mind. Ishtar, could she have been a Nephilim? That is Isis. Could she have been a Nephilim? That's not a goddess. Wrong picture. We have Diana. We have the goddess Danu, who is said to be who the Tuatha descended from. I think that might be supposed to be her there. But I, spoke about them in one of my other videos and their possible link to the tribe of Dan. But yes, they do claim to be descended from the goddess Danu, who interestingly is depicted as being blue here. And in some ancient artwork, Amun also is shown to be blue as well. And also there are a lot of Hindu, maybe not a lot. I know there's at least one Hindu god that is blue. But then that does bring to mind the question, why would the first generation of Nephilim have been all male and then all of a sudden there were females interspersed in there? How could that have happened? And that is actually when I started thinking of the genetic aspect of it. Because first of all, let me just point out that the Elohim, anytime that they are referred to in the Bible with pronouns, they are referred to with masculine pronouns. As he, as him. Sometimes in the Old Testament, they are referred to as men specifically, but nowhere in the Bible is there any indication that there are female Elohim. So that got me thinking about chromosomes. I'll bet you weren't expecting a biology lesson here today, but you're going to get a very short one. So in case you didn't know, females have XX chromosomes and males have XY chromosomes. And when a woman gets pregnant, it is the male chromosomes that determine the sex of the baby. And here, this is called a Punnett square. And so these two X chromosomes, so over here on the side, this would be the woman. And up on top, it would be the man, because the man has the X and the Y chromosome. So if the man passes on an X chromosome, they're going to have a baby girl, because the woman can only pass on an X because that's all she has. But if the man passes on a Y chromosome, then they will get a boy, because an XY is a boy, at least in human terms. But the Elohim are not like us. As Donita pointed out to me, they didn't come from mothers. So they were created. And this tied right in with what I was thinking is, what if the Elohim have only Y chromosomes? I don't know whether it would be 2 or whether it would be 1. But they would have no need to have an X chromosome because they did not come from a mother. So what if they only had Y? And what if the reason that the first generation of Nephilim were all males is because the original Elohim, they could only pass on Ys because that's all they had. But then when the next generation of Nephilim were born, they had human mothers. So they would have possibly had the capacity then to have both X and Y chromosomes because they had a human mother. And that is how then they were able to start passing on this chromosome just like normal humans do, is either pass an X or a Y. That was just something that I thought of, and I thought it was really cool. I'm hoping that it makes sense to all of you. It totally makes sense to me. But yeah, so basically, to make a long story short, the sons of God who mated with human women may have possibly only had Y chromosomes to pass on to the women, which would make all of their children male. But then when that line of Nephilim, when that line of beings began procreating, they would then have XY chromosomes because they were able to get that X chromosome from having a human mother. And then they would have been able to pass on X or Y just as typical humans would. And that is how down the line other Nephilim could have also been female. That's at least my theory. And I thought it was cool and wanted to share that with you. But I think that's all that I wanted to talk about with you today. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.